It also shows some of the paradox of foreign policy polling. So on Iraq and Syria, the president is pretty much doing what Americans want. He's not very engaged. But they don't like the result. His polling numbers are going down. Americans may be ambivalent and disengaged with the world. They don't want a president who is ambivalent and disengaged with the world. There's a difference here. He often cites the polling as saying, I'm focused on what Americans really care about. But they judge whether a president is strong in the world, where their American long-term interests are being served. I think that's a serious problem for him.
Well, Didi, you're going to work for Warner Brothers here. You're acknowledged to be a real expert on communications and helping people to put their best foot forward. What would you, if you were in the White House right now, what would you advise this president to do?
Well, I disagree. I mean, clearly people do want the president to take care of foreign policy, so they don't have to. They don't have to worry about it because they've, outsourced it to the president and his team, and that's always been thus. But what they want to know that he cares about them and their problems, and I think this president has been a little hit and miss in that department. When he's campaigning, people feel like he understands their problems and what's going on in their lives, and they like him. They generally have had pretty high personal feelings about him, and yet I think he tends to withdraw into the White House a little bit and is not out there talking to people. And I think one of the things that he needs to do more of, and I disagree that he seems attached, is listen. I think you can do both. I think people expect the president to deal with foreign policy and also be concerned about them and their problems. And I think so often we see this president talking, and I'm very happy to hear him listening to people, sitting down with somebody who says, I work really hard, my husband and I work several jobs to try to put food on the table, and we're not getting ahead. I think people want to know that he's hearing from people like them with problems like them. And so it's not the only thing he's doing, and it's not the only thing he's going to do, but it is a campaign season, and they want to know that he hears and understands and feels their pain, to quote another president.
Let me ask you this, Todd, because you've just done this book, and I want to talk about that a little bit, your book on civil rights. But a big part of that book was Lyndon Johnson and how... Didi says, the president needs to be listening. A lot of people up on the Hill, both Democrats and Republicans, say the president ought to be listening to them and that he ought to make more of an effort to try to build some kind of a relationship with not Republicans up there, but with Democrats as well. Is that a fair
Yeah, no, I think the Democrats feel very under-tended on the Hill, and the White House has made a concerted effort in the last few months under Dennis McDonough, the new chief of staff, and the new congressional relations shop, to make more of an effort to just set aside routine time every week for the president to reach out to members of Congress. But I think it's fair to say that he did not do enough of that in the first part of his presidency. And one of the things that President Johnson did so well during the fight over the Civil Rights Bill, he called the Southern opponents of the bill, not because he thought he'd change their mind, but because he knew he would learn valuable intelligence about what was on their mind. And I think more information is always better information, and President Obama could certainly stand to just pick up the phone and hear what people are thinking.
As you look back on that period, what could today's politicians learn from the politicians of that day? Because they did know one another. They did talk to one another. Yeah. Johnson knew he couldn't pass that bill without Everett Dirksen. What advice should they take away from what happened in 1964?
Well, I guess the principal thing I would say is that just because something seems impossible doesn't mean it's necessarily impossible. The veterans of that bill, the surviving aides to Mike Mansfield, Hubert Humphrey, they all said, we weren't sure this could happen. And because they worked at it and let it play out over many months, let the opponents have their say, the whole energy suddenly changed because they've kept their shoulder to the wheel. Politics today is so different. The districts are so different. They're redder and redder and bluer and bluer. There's no incentive for bipartisan cooperation. I'm not sure there's really a good analogy that we could bring to bear, but I do think it's astounding that 50 years ago people basically did the right thing for the right reason, and sort of fundamental decency and common sense prevailed, and I think that's always...
Peggy, we have about 30 seconds left. Will we ever see that day again?
Oh my goodness, maybe we can profitably look at the past, and histories like your book. It's one of the things we could all learn from Mr. Johnson, who was a Democrat. He got that great legislation passed with Republicans. He had to ignore part of his own party, the Southern Bloc, the Democrats. He picked off the Republicans. They backed him up. Patriotism is a powerful force when honestly and idealistically unleashed by leaders. That's part of what happened, I think, part of what I see in your book.
Well, I hope we can somehow find a way to be more like we used to be in those days.